from there. So thanks everybody for coming to Lightning Talks. We're super excited. What Lightning Talks are, if you don't know, is a series of short 7 to 10-ish minute talks given by people in the Firehose community. Today we have 3 Firehose alumni. You guys are all alumni, and we have 1 Firehose mentor, so I'm excited about that. And we're going to be giving a handful of talks, so if you go to the Firehose Lightning Talks site, Colin, can you actually put that in the chat? So if you go there, you can see what the actual topics are. And the first one is going to be on CSS from John. So John, why don't you just take it away?
Okay, sweet. So let me share my screen first.
Nice.
Okay, is this good? Can everyone see this? Mm-hmm. Okay, so my talk is on intermediate CSS, which I will just call you've built your first 1 or 2 websites and you run into some problems. So this talk is a highly opinionated talk by a slightly less experienced developer about maybe a better way to write your CSS. I'm not going to call this best practices. I'm not even going to call this good practices. I'm just going to call these probably a little bit better practices if you only built like 2 or 3 websites. Okay, so what's the motivation for this talk? Well, if you build some websites, you might run into things like this, like where you just have section 2 content as one of your CSS selectors, or something like primary menu.subtitle.ul.li.a. And these types of things are, it's hard to maintain. You don't really know what they are a month or 2 months after writing this, and it just makes it a nightmare to go back and try to fix this up. But something like this also results in like very, very brittle code. So this selector will affect this A tag. But what happens if you move this A tag outside of this? If you move it to over here, then this selector's styling no longer applies. So it's very rigid. You have to keep this in order for this styling to apply. And what ends up happening is you run into problems like specificity creep, which means the next selector, you just keep adding on and on and on and more, and you get really, really hard, unmaintainable code. And some other problems that you run into is you have what's called dead code, where in your CSS, you just have a bunch of stylings, maybe hashtag section 2 content, and you move some stuff around, but you're not really sure if this styling is still being used or not. So you just kind of keep that in your style sheet. And the end result of all of this is you have these huge 500 to 1,000 line style sheets that is very bloated. You don't know what goes where, and it's just kind of like a big stream of consciousness. And you also have the worst part of CSS is the cascading parts of it, cascading style sheets, which means one part of the style sheet affects something else, which affects something else, which affects something else, and it's just impossible to track. So hopefully this talk will help you resolve some of these issues and write more maintainable CSS. So here's the joke. 2 CSS properties walk into a bar stool in a completely different bar falls over. And this just goes back to the fact that CSS all have effects on each other. There's so much side effects, and it's really difficult to know what will affect what. So this gets back to the main point of this talk, which is that writing CSS is really easy, but maintaining CSS is actually super, super hard. So pretty much almost all the problems with CSS comes back to naming CSS. And when you want to name CSS, there's 3 main things that I think are really important. First is that you want CSS that's easy to understand its purpose in the actual CSS. So in your style sheets, if I see something like hashtag section 2 ID, what does that mean? It's really difficult to know what it means. And ideally, I want to have CSS where the CSS names are named something that I can mentally construct how the web page will look just by looking at the style sheet. That's ideal. And the reverse of that is I also want really meaningful CSS in HTML. So if I have a div and I have class class 1, class 2, class 3, this is really meaningless. I don't really know what each one of these things does. And that means I have to go back into the style sheet and try to figure this out. And that takes a lot of time. And the third thing that I think is really important when writing CSS is that we want CSS names that are easy to write. So I don't have to stay here and think for 2 minutes to come up with a name for the CSS property. So I just want CSS that's really easy to write and that's really easy to understand from an HTML side and from a CSS side. And in general, we want CSS that's flat, meaning that you don't have this super high specificity. You want CSS that's robust. So changing one div to another place doesn't just break everything. And you also want CSS that's really dry. So you just don't have really big style sheets. Everything's really simple and maintainable. So I think this is like a kind of like the philosophy for how we should write CSS. So what's a solution to this? BEM. So BEM stands for Block Element Modifier. And this is a very popular kind of philosophy for how you can write CSS. The way that I like to think about this is block is really just a component, and element is just a part of a component, and the modifier is kind of like a state. So as an example, here's Google Gmail. And so we're just going to look at this part, which is the nav. So a block, which would be the component, would be just the nav bar. An item could just be these individual items here, these elements. So these are the individual elements. And then a modifier could just be that this is active. It's just a state. So modifiers could be it's active, it's hovered, or something else. So this is called BEM. So we'll look into this right here. So I just pulled this off of Dribble, and this is just a simple web interface that I found online. And how could we construct this in BEM? So the entire idea of BEM is that you want to kind of split your websites up into components, into visual logical components. So this could be a component right here. This could be a component right here. And like these cards are kind of components. And so if we were to write the CSS here, I might have this entire component just called a movie card. And this image here is just movie card and image. Movie card description box, which is this box right here. And then you have a title, tags, and then a runtime. And the benefit of this is that everything's really, really flat. I could take this box out and it wouldn't affect anything else. And so what I mean by this is that this code is super modular. Because all my code is prefixed with a movie card, I know that the CSS I write for this won't affect anything other than the movie card. It also makes it very flat because everything is just one specificity. So there's no side effects at all. I know that everything that's for this for movie card title will only affect movie card title. And this is really logical, and I don't have to think for 2 minutes about how to name everything. Okay, so this is all really well and good, but there is one problem though. This is really good for building like interfaces, but what happens if you run into this? So this I just pulled from Starbucks' website. What would you call like this component, or this component, or this component, or this component, where everything is sort of similar, but just a little bit different? The layout's just a little bit different. And, or for instance, let's say we have this layout where we just have 3 headers and they're just all just a little bit different. This one has just more margin. This one's just a different color, and this one's just aligned differently. Do we just name it header 1, header 2, header 3? Like, how would you logically name this? And so this is kind of the second main, I guess, way of writing CSS, which is I would recommend for kind of very content-heavy sites, which is an atomic approach. So if you were to go to Atomic CSS, their way of writing CSS is everything's in just these classes, and it just kind of gets rendered like in real time. So So this thing right here is just, this class determines the background color. This one is the text color. And this right here is just the text font. So the benefit of writing CSS like this is that you can really easily tell from reading your actual HTML files what everything does. It's very clear how everything affects everything. And so this makes it really useful. For instance, if we're writing a bunch of button classes, like these are all very, very similar, but they're just a little bit different. So instead of having to write 25 different classes, I could actually do this a lot quicker by using things called utility classes. So what are utility classes? Utility classes are pretty much what I was just hinting at. It's that I can, for a lot of very common things, I can just make a class called center, and in it, I just have text align center, or a class called margin top 15. And the only thing in this class is I set margin top 15. So it lets me reuse a lot of these really common components. So I don't have to write a CSS class for this, a CSS class for this, and a CSS class for this. And so if we were to go back and write these classes, we could pretty much just logically split all these different button classes into just 3 different things. I can have a button shape, a button size, and just a button color. And as long as I have a button color that's red, orange, blue, green, and large, another blue button shape, just a rectangle, a hollow on the inside, and these things, I could just mix and match these classes and be able to generate all these different buttons on the fly. Okay, so back to what we said earlier. For CSS, you want things that's easy to understand in its CSS and easy to understand in HTML. And so I kind of presented 2 different ways of doing that. One is this right here is style sheet semantic, right? Like these styles are really easy to understand from a style sheet perspective. It's style-wise meaningful. And then you also have things like these, which are content semantic, which is that if I were to look at a style sheet, I can very easily see how everything will render together. But like, what happens if I want to have my cake and kind of eat it at the same time? What happens if I want just like everything? And so this gets to the next topic, which is Sass. So if you're not familiar with Sass, there's another lightning talk about this by Michaela, which is really, really serves as kind of like a basis for this. But Sass has a lot of different properties, but I'm just going to talk about 3 properties that I think you can use to make kind of all of these things come together, and that you can write CSS that's easy to understand in CSS, easy to understand in HTML. It's easy to write, it's very flat, it's robust, and it's very dry. So 3 things, 3 really the only things that you need to know about Sass to get started is that in Sass we can have variables. So I can call red primary color, or it could just be something else like hashtag DDDDD for a color. And you can set any kind of property as a variable. So I can have primary color, I can have a border width, and I can also kind of inject one CSS property into a bunch of different places. So for instance, what if as kind of like a overall web style, I just want everything here to just have borders. And I want the borders to be red, 1 pixel, and solid. So I just want all of this in these things. I could just create a border class and extend these into all of these things. And what happens is that this style will just get injected into all of these things. And so later on, if instead of having the border just be 1 pixel, I want it to be 2 pixels for all my styles, I just have to change this from 1 pixel to 2 pixel. And same thing with red, or for instance, if I just want to have an entirely different border styling, I could just do it in here, and that would just get rendered into each one of these places. And then the last thing that's really interesting about Sass is this and sign. And what this really just means is that when this Sass gets rendered, it just gets rendered into .moviecard__image. And so this and thing is just a placeholder for like the class that was just that this thing is in. So this just gets rendered into these class selectors. And the other nice thing about writing styles like this in this kind of nested format is from this, I can pretty easily tell how everything could pretty much look in my HTML. I have an image, I have a description box, and this is all nested inside of Movie Card. And because of this, I can very visually just kind of split things up. And the last thing that's really nice about Sass is that you can have things that are called partials. So this right here would just go in a file called _card.sass, and it would just, and then in the end, all of these things would get put together into one long CSS file. And I think Rails gives you that for free. And so that's the end of the talk.
I was muted. So yeah, does anybody have any questions for John? One question I would have is, how did you like learn about this? Did you just like read blog posts? Did you just try a bunch of different approaches? I feel like my approach to CSS is like hack it until it works, and then it works, and I just kind of move on to the next thing. So I guess, what's your approach to refactoring and like just your thought process behind this stuff?
Yeah, so I did spend a lot of time reading different blog posts, trying to come up with like the best way of writing it. And that's why I just call this a meta approach, because it's still just kind of experimenting and trying to figure out things on the fly. And it's kind of a combination of all three of these things, which is figuring out the best practices by the people in the community, testing things out, and also just kind of going by a lot of like, if you're doing Angular code or React code, they all kind of have their own philosophies, and it's just kind of combining all these things together and trying to figure out what's right.
Yeah, I can definitely see this playing really well with like React or Angular, like really well. So that's really cool. Anybody else have any other questions?
I got a question.
Yeah.
So do you just kind of go something like, when you start a project, say, like rather than just sit and stare at the screen trying to figure out exactly what you're going to call everything, like what do you just go back and like once you figure it out and then kind of revamp it as you go, or do you plan out a whole bunch up front? Like what's your personal preference, I guess?
So I kind of use a lot of the same vocabulary. So so if I'm building up, so I try to keep things very descriptive. And after you build a lot, a good maybe 4 or 5 websites, components are pretty similar. They're just, you have containers, you have cards, you have boxes, and you just try to keep it as contextual as possible. So maybe that's pretty much it.
That's cool.
Yeah,
I definitely pretty deeper meaning or anything. Really just like practically what your preference is. So
yeah, I think once you start doing things like the BEM way, things kind of just fall into place, because you don't have to spend so long trying to come up with what the name is. It's whatever this thing is, and then it has elements, and then it has modifiers. And so when I'm writing CSS, I really don't think that much time about it. You might have like, and I think a key part of this is to just kind of plan things out ahead of time. If you look at your designs ahead of time, you should have a good idea. And if things are like really difficult, like if you have 3-4 different nav bars, I think that's probably a hint that you should be trying to take the second approach, which is just trying to figure out the similar components and kind of build it in like an atomic way.
I think also a few things I've learned is naming things how you see them. So basically the WYSIWYG style. So if you are building a movie database, this will be my movie. This is the movie's title. This is the movie's description. Naming things that way makes things super easy when you're going back to your CSS to start writing it. And then you're like, oh crap, now this doesn't work on mobile. What was that called? And lot of that. The other thing is, if you don't have good wireframes before you start, that's where my big struggle is. If I don't have a solid design down, my mind goes in a million directions with millions of inspirations. Then I start naming things weird, and I start designing things weird, and it just looks like garbage. So start out with a solid design first, and then make it simple on yourself from then out. And then it's just basically you write your HTML, how you see it from your design, and then you go into your CSS, and it makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely having good designs to start off with is really, really important. Definitely +1 to that.
How do you deal with, so like in like Reactor, like what I'm thinking about is like the component structure, and you have like components, and sometimes a component will have a subcomponent within the component. And all of a sudden, if you're using the BEM style, I can see sort of wanting to fall back into the old. Do you sort of see what the question is sort of like if you have a subcomponent within a bigger component, and do you like, is it just like you don't like fall victim to the urge of being like, oh, only within this subcomponent I want this custom? Do you see what I'm asking?
Yeah. So the question is like, if you have like one component which has a part inside a part, how do you deal with that? If the parts are not that complicated, so let me go back to the card example.
So we can't see your screen. Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So if I have something like this, oops. Yeah. So I have this like wrapper. I just call it movie card description box that goes around this. And even though the title, the tags, and the runtime are inside this description box, I'm still only doing this one layer deep. I'm calling it movie card underscore title. And the reason for this is that in BEM, you don't want to have movie card description box title because this keeps everything just one layer flat. So later on, if I want to change this up, like if I just want to have the Great Gatsby up here, it won't break because I've taken it outside of this description box. If you have things 3 or 4 component layers deep, that is probably like a hint that maybe you should try to split these things up into smaller components. So I think it's really those two main things. Split them up, or just nest things one layer deep.
Super interesting. Cool, good stuff. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Have you talked with anybody about the increase of this? Because lately I've been looking at certain websites when I look for inspiration and look at the code and stuff like that, and I'm seeing this more and more frequently, more explicit, wording and how things are written versus, I mean, you can tell when it's a Bootstrap site, or you can tell when it's a framework site because they're exactly the same, and then you can tell when it's a from the ground up site where they have very explicit names.
Yeah, there's definitely 3 main big, from like a content semantic perspective of writing CSS, there's just BEM, there's object-oriented CSS, and there's SMA CSS, but they're all really, really similar. And there's definitely a convergence towards writing things in the BEM way. Google just had their like big tech conference like last month, and I was watching one of the talks, and in it, while they're writing CSS, they were writing it in the BEM style. So I think that there's a lot of developers that even if they don't follow a purely BEM way of writing things, they still try to kind of follow that pattern. So does that answer your question? I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
More informed. I've been seeing a lot of Medium articles written about it. I've been seeing a lot of more articles pop up within 2016 and the new trends for 2016 web design and stuff like that. And that's one of the things that I've noticed increasingly.
The reason, I think one of the big reasons for that is right now, if you're looking at like front-end development, everything is kind of trending towards like components, where you build React and Angular are both doing this, where you build a nav bar component, or you build, like a card component. And usually when those things are structured, you just have one folder that has your HTML, your JavaScript, and your CSS for that. And Dem is kind of just really, really good for writing it that way. So I think a lot of people are kind of adopting this system.
Right.
Cool. Good stuff. All right, let's move on to the next talk. So thanks so much, John. That was really insightful. And it's something that I'm not particularly skilled with, but I really can see the approach making your life a lot easier. And it also is pretty fascinating, the fact that you don't necessarily need to do your entire project with it. If you have an existing project, it looks like you can just start using it right away and slowly weave it in more and more. So I'm going to try to start writing more CSS like that for sure. Cool. Next up, we have Philip, who's going to jump in about refactoring a coding challenge. So Phil, why don't you jump right in?
Okay. Can y'all hear me?
Yep.
All right. Can you see the screen here?
Yeah, we see your code. It's like front and center.
Yeah, it shouldn't show that. Hold on one second. I had my web browser there. Let's try this. Can you see that?
Yep, now we see your slides.
Okay, great. So this is about, this is almost, I'm not sure it's talk worthy, but anyway, it has changed my life a little bit. And this is about a tiny refactoring technique that can give a lot of benefit, especially to new programmers. There's a lot of design principles out there that are very wonderful and meaningful, like single responsibility and dependency inversion and all these things. But usually you don't appreciate, well, I certainly didn't, and most of the people I've mentored, they don't appreciate those until they've suffered a little bit. And sometimes if you try to teach those too early, it's not that beneficial. But this one, extract method, is a tiny little technique that can really help you from day one. I work on a team, and we've gradually been getting into this more and more. I don't want to make it sound more fancy than it is, but anyway, the blessing and the problem of Ruby is that it's possible to be very clever and get a lot done in a very short amount of space. So, you know, when you write code or you read code, you always come across things that are doing a lot in one line, or maybe a lot in two lines. And on the one hand, this is wonderful because it's a powerful language. On the other hand, it means that when you are looking at code, you have to stop to basically run the code in your head and figure out what people are doing a lot. And even if it's pretty simple, what I found is that when you start to extract this code into one-line methods that have descriptive titles, you get a lot of benefit out of it. So let me show you what I mean. Sandy Metz talked about something called the squint test, which is like when you look at code, like a method or class, and it's not clear right away what's happening, or maybe it's just too long, then that code is failing something called the squint test. And I'm pretty severe. I mean, to me, it's like if I have to spend more than 7 seconds figuring out what something does, I'm pretty unhappy about it. I just want it to be more descriptive. So what do people usually do to solve this problem is they just add comments, and comments are great, and I'm not anti-comment at all. But this refactoring method is sort of a replacement for comments, not altogether, but sort of a replacement. Yeah, so here's some code that fails the squint test. And, you know, you can just see there's a lot going on there. It's not evident what's happening. And it's what, 30-something lines long. So when you write code, it needs to read like a story. And that's why, you know, we call it writing software. It's not coding. It's not engineering. We're describing a path through a system that we're creating to solve a problem. And so we just have to use human words, English words, so that when a newcomer comes, when they look at these lines of code, they're so descriptive and so clear, just like a paragraph in a book, where you know who the subject is, you know who the protagonist is, no one should have to wonder what anything stands for. And so honestly, this is like, if you've ever worked with overseas help, other contractors, one of the hardest things, it's not about technical competence. It's not about cultural differences. What it always comes down to is communication and the ability of people from another language. That's all it is, to communicate very effectively and transparently in the language that that you're using. So let me go on a little further. So I would write a helper method for like almost any regular expression, because it's not so obvious right away, what they're doing. Any kind of complex operation on a collection, any kind of complex conditional, and basically anything that makes you think, I'm like ready to write a helper method, because in your mind, you have a certain budget, a certain space. I mean, I know it's different for all of us, and maybe some of y'all you have a huge desk in your mind where you can lay out all these things in your code. But for most of us, it's not that big. And so we don't want to eat up that space with trying to figure out what all these little sections of code do that aren't that complicated, but they still take a little bit of that budget away. And then you don't have that much left to consider the really big problems. And so here's some other principles. If you have a method that's longer than 7 lines, you probably need to break it up into some helpers. Anything that takes more than a few seconds to understand. And even here, like sometimes you're doing something in your code that's very simple, like you're just reversing an array, but it's not that clear why you're doing it. So you should bundle that action in a helper method that explains the reason why. And again, these are just principles. You shouldn't go beat people up with these. That's not the point at all. So one of my students he was working on this the other day, the Loon algorithm, which is kind of this multi-step thing to verify credit cards. And I was helping him refactor it, and he was so happy that I thought I would pull it up here. So let me see if I can pull it up. Get rid of this. And get rid of this. And are y'all able to see this still?
Yep, you're all good.
All right. And I'm still in my little time constraint here. So this is what he started with, and it works. And one nice thing about refactoring this way, that one thing that really helps is if you have tests. So like down here at the bottom of the file, those are the original RSpec tests for this thing. So if I run the tests, they pass. So his solution works. There's nothing wrong with it. But as an example, like he is doing things here. He's splitting this number that comes in, which is an integer, into an array of integers. And so here's this action. He's reversing it to start from the right. And in a very good way, he's putting comments here to explain everything. Now here's the thing with comments is comments are code that's not executed. It's basically stale code. And that means they tend to go out of date. And if you've ever worked on a project that is old or has had many, many revisions, you always come across comments that it's like, I wish this comment had never been born, because it points me in the wrong direction. And if it wasn't here, at least I'd know I need to look closely to see what something's doing. Now, I'm not anti-comment. You still need them. But if there's another way to explain things without using comments, it's better, because code that's being executed is going to get a lot more scrutiny, and people are going to be a little more careful when they describe stuff. Anyway, so here's this method. It's about 20 lines long. And so I'm just going to quickly run you through, let's see here, some of these. So the first refactoring is like that line up there that turns that integer to an array of integers. I just put it in a one-line method. This line here is a little weird, converting a number to a string, splitting it up, and then converting it back into integers. But, because it has this name and you're using it up here, it's pretty clear what's happening. Okay, the next one is, the number you have to start from the right side of the number to work out this Loon algorithm. Like, that's part of the logical requirement of the problem, but his code didn't really explain why he was reversing it. So even though number.array.reverse is not a complicated operation, you put it in a helper method that explains what you're doing. It helps whoever comes to your code next. Let me go back here. Okay, then there's this line, which is a ternary operation, which I'm not too crazy about, but you're supposed to go through every digit and double it, and then if it's more than 9, you subtract 9 from it, and it's and then you add that all up. So he's doing all that in one loop here, and it works, but it's really not clear, you know, what's happening. And so it's better just to break it up into multiple passes. And so first pass is change this to double every other and subtract 9 if necessary. Now look, at every step, all the tests still pass. And that's the nice thing about tests is you can refactor piece by piece by piece, and you keep running your tests, and that way you can do it in tiny pieces. You don't want to like try to refactor the whole thing at once, because then you might get into a hole. Anyway, I'm going to go a little quicker. So, am I going the right way? Yeah. So, I'm going backwards, sorry. I have this shortcut that cycles me through my commits. So I have this method, double every other and subtract 9 if necessary. You might look at this and say, that is a ridiculously long and descriptive method name. And I would say, thank you very much. That's exactly how I want it to be. There's no real limit on what you can put in a method name, and I've had some that are twice that long. As long as it explains what's happening, it's helpful. So anyway, eventually you can see up here that this method to see if something's valid is starting to be a lot more easy to follow. You start with this number array, you turn it into an array of integers, you reverse it, you double every other one, you subtract 9 if it's over 9, and then you have a few more things going on here. And so here I turned, see these operations, let me go back to the last one. This is a method that's not that hard to follow. And so all I do here is convert it into one line. Now I would never just leave this line alone in the code without describing it, because I don't want someone to have to take time to figure out what's going on. They need to know why we're doing it. Like this one, subtract 9 if over 9. Okay, I'm almost done. So I don't know if everyone's following along. This line here, where you calculate the sum, is about the only one that I wouldn't put into a helper method, because that's kind of a Ruby idiom to go through a collection and inject an operation on it. Doesn't really need much explanation. Plus, I'm calling it sum. So if you don't know what that means, then you probably have bigger fish to fry. And so, but one thing, like there's this thing here to check to see if the number is valid by seeing if the sum is divisible by 10. And he has a comment here to explain it, which is very good. But why not just extract that itself, you know, into its own method? Is the sum valid? And that, you know, you can bottle up the logic related to that. And so at every stage, you have the test passing. And so when you start, this is a kind of technique. Eventually, you'll have a lot of tiny little methods like that. They'll have funny names, but when you come into your code to look at it, it'll be really clear what's happening. I mean, you could kind of nest these calls like this. Let's see if I did that. Is that right? Yeah, there you are. This is another way to do it. You can just kind of nest them within each other. So you're just kind of calling everything once. It doesn't really matter. But that that is an amazing lightning talk, right? I feel kind of funny presenting that. But to me, this when you apply this technique pretty aggressively to existing code bases or new ones, it really helps, because that poor guy who has to understand your code later and is having trouble with it, that's you after lunch. I mean, it's not some guy down the road. It's you in just a few minutes from now. And unless I'm the stupidest person on this screencast, which is possible, but I really benefit from breaking things up like this, and it's really changed the way that we work on my team and my real job, and I hope to pass it on to some of you. And that's it.
I wish I had worked on your team in my last gig. Because there was plenty of methods, and like the code was, you know, good 15 years old in some parts, and it's just like trying to learn what's going on, and like it was .NET too, so like I wasn't too familiar with it to start with, and then like all the methods like that. So yeah, this would have been awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I got here through pain. Like, I can show you one thing. Let's see here. So here's some code that I wrote. this is code that I wrote, back in, this is, now in my defense, if you look, those commits were made in 2007. It was a long time ago, but this is Ruby on Rails. And, you learn by suffering. You go back and try to refactor some of this stuff or make changes for your client. And you just don't realize how easy it is to just pull out little pieces so that when you come back, it's just a story that's easy as pie to understand.
It's funny when you're showing me this code because I remember writing like very similar code. Like I literally can see the code in my mind that's like basically the exact same as this. That like in retrospect, I'm like, wow, I probably could have made that a little bit simpler. But super good talk. And I think it's really insightful. I think the method that you had that's like piecing all of it together, it's almost like the problem story itself. Like if you look at the sort of steps, first do this, then do this, then do this, like you're defining the actual steps in the code itself, which is making the code both less likely to break and just like less brittle. And the fact that comments go stale is super, super true too. So yeah, does anybody have any questions about this like refactor technique?
Super helpful.
Absolutely.
I would like to work on code that looked like that.
Well, come work with me.
Sold.
I mean, well, not that I write code like that all the time, but I know when I'm not, at least. I feel bad, and I'll make it better.
No, it's kind of what we were talking about in the chat here is you go on Stack Overflow or you go and get help from somebody, and a lot of people will write, and it's like their intention is to try and be the cleverest person in the room at the sacrifice of confusing the hell out of everybody else around them. And it's just not helpful. This, to me, if I was a complete noob and had no idea what was going on, I could logically go through this and figure it out. I don't need to be a programmer to read this and kind of follow along. I think I would need to know what the difference would be between a private method and not. But beyond that, you can look at this and say, okay, I know what's actually kind of going on. Yeah. And a lot of the code you see on Stack Overflow and stuff like that, it's just, there's the answer to my problem. It works, but I have no idea why it works or how it works or what the process in which it's going. So seeing stuff like this is super helpful for people who are just getting out and for everybody in general.
Yeah, there's one area where I didn't really have time. It's beyond the scope of this, but one area where I do this super religiously is in writing tests, because tests can get kind of hard to understand. Tests are like the only part of your code that's not tested, if you think about it. And sometimes we use let statements. I don't know if y'all have used RSpec much, but you can use let and you can define all these things. And to me, when you get down to your actual test, there's these mysterious entities being referred to in your test that are in these let statements 100 lines up. And it just keeps you from being able to look at that span of code and really, see the story be told. So I don't use let in my tests. Well, I do sometimes if I'm working with others who like that. But I tend to just use helper methods, and I put them in that spec file, and they're just a little bit more descriptive, and I'll drop them into each little expectation block. And yeah, it adds a line of code, but it also adds, it keeps the plot clear, as to what's happening. So maybe that's another talk to show how you would use this in testing. Anyway.
Yeah, that's super awesome. So yeah, big thanks for Philip for giving a talk, the first mentor giving a talk. So I'm really excited about that too. So thanks again, Philip. That was awesome. And I think talking about a concrete example of refactoring is really sort of like this kind of confusing and scary thing. And the fact that there's actually like processes that it's not like you can do it without almost thinking once you learn the process. And this is one example of what break things down into some small functions and then just solve it from there. So super, super valuable. And I'd encourage everybody to try to apply this principle to coding challenges and stuff that you're working on in other places. Next up, we have Colin. You want to jump in, Colin?
Sure. So I don't have any fancy slides, but my talk will be about getting started with Cloud Cannon. So when I started Firehose, I'm kind of the Jekyll guy. I launched a lot of Jekyll conversations when I started, and Jekyll's really great, and we use it for the community site, and we've taught it, and I've done lightning talks on it, and to beat down everything. My personal site is written in Jekyll. A lot of sites are written in Jekyll. GitHub natively supports Jekyll, so you can launch static websites. But the big problem with Jekyll is that it is a pain for anybody outside of being a developer to update, to maintain, to do anything of the sort. So I wanted to start working with freelance clients. I wanted to start building websites, but I didn't want to have to be maintaining them all the time. So I was looking for content management systems. Number one thing for content management systems is obviously WordPress or Squarespace or Wix or anything like that. Those aren't great, and WordPress is PHP, and I didn't want to learn PHP. So I sought out a content management system for Jekyll, and that's what I found with Cloud Cannon. So we'll go over it. It's super straightforward. Everybody see this? So this is Cloud Cannon's landing page. Like I said, it's super simple. It's just a content management system for Jekyll static sites. It makes life super simple. The pricing was the biggest thing for me in comparison to WordPress. For the basic, it's $25 per user per month, which for personal site is a little on the heavy end if you're just doing one site. But what was great about it is you can have unlimited sites on it. So if you are doing this for freelance work, you can sell hosting right into it. You can charge $25 a month or $15 a month or $10 a month, and you can basically just profit off of doing hosting because you can have unlimited amount of websites on your Jekyll platform. There are some limitations on what you can do, the white labeling stuff. So basically I'll say this, if you send out a link to somebody, I'll say, this link was sent through Cloud Cannon versus your personal website or your web agency's site or what have you. But if you get enough clients, you can quickly up your tier here. So pricing's pretty expensive comparatively to WordPress in some scenarios if you're going to do it on your own. But it's worth it if you're doing multiple clients. So it is actually very easy to use. This is actually my personal website. It is hosted on Cloud Cannon, and that is right here. So it's all built in Jekyll, and you'll have this neat little file browser so you can go through and look at everything you have on here. What's kind of cool about it is you can go in and you can actually edit it right from Cloud Cannon. But what makes it really powerful is, because I don't want to mess up my site, I'm going to add something. So super simple to hook it up to your GitHub. So I set up a repo earlier. So you just create a new site, connect to your GitHub. Here's my Jekyll theme. It will download the files and import everything. You'll see over here it's syncing and building up your site. And then if you want to launch it, you can look at what it says. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, makes life super easy. What's really cool I found about it is that you can make things editable. So you can go into this landing HTML, and if this is the title, if I add editable, which I already did earlier, I can go into my editor, click on this, save it, and then it'll start syncing and rebuilding. Let's refresh. And you got to change. So this is really cool, not only from a developer perspective, but from a client perspective, because you can add users to this and invite people to use it. So your clients can come in, and wherever you've specified it's editable, they can come in, change the content of this, and that's all they have to do. They don't have to call you up. They don't have to get you to log in, spend your time. You don't have to charge them maintenance fees to update the code on a regular basis. Makes life super simple. And then you can go into collections, just like you would in any Jekyll site. You can go into posts. You can add, if you have a blog on here, you can add a new post, and this makes life really easy. So now you don't have to write it, open up your text editor, write a new blog post, upload it to GitHub, then you don't have, and then get it all working and making sure everything's working. You can just come right in here. You can publish the post. Make sure it's synced up. And there you go. Really simple. So that's kind of the broad overview of Jekyll. Makes things really nice, makes things really editable. You can go in and you can share it. You can add domains, authentication, so you can add user accounts in here. So you can add your client's user in there and they can come in and edit it. If you upgrade to the agency plan, you can set permissions so they can't edit everything, just like you would with WordPress. You would set certain levels of administration. Yeah, I mean, when I first started using this, it's just super simple. And then if you go through, let's see here, which I think I have it open, but the stupid thing's in my way. And if you go in your code, and it's actually updating and syncing with Jekyll on a regular basis. So whenever you make a changes right in GitHub, it syncs, it uploads, it does all that stuff for you. So you don't have to do pull requests. You don't have to make sure everything's working. You don't make sure you're on master when everything's changed. There's very little maintenance in this. I've had 0 issues with my personal site. The uptime for it's great. The biggest downside I've seen to it is the pricing. And that's not even that horrible when you want more than one site on there, and you can have as many as you want, so it's brilliant. So that's kind of it. I mean, there isn't too much about it, and you can go in, you can edit whatever site you want, you can upload your stuff. It depends on how you write your code, so and they don't have any file limits either, which is really nice. So I can store all my photos on here. Go in here, edit the actual file names, add thumbnails and stuff like that. So you obviously have to build out your first Jekyll site and then go from there. But beyond that, it's plug and play. It makes life easy.
Very, very cool. Does anybody have any questions? I think the syncing to GitHub is kind of the thing that I think is the coolest. The fact that it makes the commit and it just, so you have the code backed up. So it's not like you have all the code there. It's not like you have to worry about sort of like the changes on top. So even if you stop using Cloud Cannon because of whatever reason, it's not like you lost all of the work that you've done in it. It's really cool.
Right. That's what I really liked about it. It doesn't pigeonhole you into it. And you don't have to sit there. You don't have to back things up. You don't need to make sure that you have an active backup on your, on your development machine or whatever. And if the client screws things up somehow, which is very difficult because I tried doing it to act like a client before I wanted to start putting freelance clients onto this platform. I tried to break things and I tried to make things go wonky, and I couldn't. But if you do, all you have to do is go to GitHub and revert back to a previous commit and you're golden again. You have no issues with it, which is super nice. The support team's really good. Their Twitter response is awesome. They're in New Zealand, so there's about a 6 to 12 hour delay if you need anything immediately. But they've been very good to answer questions. They do a Jekyll remote conf, which is it's a conference remote. It's all screen share. And they do it every year, and they have a ton of information on what's happening in the Jekyll world on their platform. And it's starting to grow in popularity. I've talked to they've got case studies, and I've actually reached out to some of the people who use it, and they've all been super happy with it. And I mean, when you're looking at Netflix and Engine Yard being on there and using Cloud Cannon as updating their static sites, I'd say you're in pretty safe hands. But I reached out to both the Brandon Setter and this digital agency, and asked them, how it was dealing with clients and everything like that. And they said it's been super easy. And we were talking a little bit earlier about WordPress, and it can get kind of confusing. The interface is kind of confusing for somebody who doesn't understand what's going on, where I've found that if you set it up right and train your people right with Cloud Cannon, it makes life very easy. It's very user-friendly, and nobody really has too many questions.
Really cool.
When you say you set it up right, or working with a client, do you have like a screen share, like a half hour, you send them documentation? Like, how would you hand it off to them?
I would hand it off like I would hand off any client. When you're done with a job, you go over it, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, and especially in consulting. And this is what I do with my regular IT clients too. Is I'll sit down with them, go over what we did, how the new feature works, and then simple steps on how to use it. And then typically I'll do like 1 month of free support in a way. So obviously you can show somebody how to do something, and 30 seconds later they're going to completely forget how to do it. I mean, I'm that way. You can show me how to do something, and there's a good chance I'll remember, but if I don't touch it for a month, unless you're actively updating your site's content regularly, you're not touching it. That's kind of the whole point, is you don't want to have to touch it. So if they call you up a month later and like, oh, I got to update this content, but I don't remember how, or, you can just walk through them. But I do, if it's any client that isn't in my general area, I typically do like remote desktop sessions, kind of like screen sharing sessions, where I'll walk them through the whole process. And if they have questions, I let them click around and see. Sometimes if you're just showing somebody, they don't really know, so I kind of force them to use it themselves, and then I'll walk them through but make them click the buttons. That seems to help a lot.
Awesome. Good stuff.
Cool.
Looks really cool. I kind of want to play with it now. It's too bad that it's $25 a month. Kind of. Do they have a free?
There's a free tier, free plan, I believe.
So you can experiment with it before you actually pay them.
There's a 30-day free trial.
Cool.
So, and $25 a month, if you have a bunch of stuff on there, like I said, it's not really that expensive if you think about it. Like I have, for my freelance stuff, I've got a couple of family businesses that I helped out, and I threw them all on there, and I charge them, I charge them $15 a month for hosting. It covers my costs for Cloud Cannon, and anything over 2 sites, it's paying for the hosting costs of it right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Super cool stuff.
Hey, Colin, I have a question. Have you looked into any alternatives? Is there anything out there like this? And
there is a company. They just reached out to me on Twitter, or they added me on Twitter. I don't remember their name. Let me look it up quick. But they just started doing it as well. I didn't dig into it much, but it seems very similar. The pricing was a little bit more expensive. I think that's why I didn't really jump into it. I'll look for it. Actually, I think I found it. I don't know. I'll look for it. I can get back to you. But it seems to be growing in popularity because so many people use Jekyll, and with GitHub, being able to store your sites there, it just is kind of the natural progression. So I'll get you a link for that site. I don't remember when they added me, so I'll have to look.
Sweet, cool, thanks.
I'm looking at the product hunt page for Cloud Cannon now, putting that in the chat. Some interesting discussion about it. But cool, good stuff. Thanks for the talk, Colin. That was really great.
No problem.
Dave, you're up last. You want to share your screen and
Yep.
get your presentation ready?
Sounds good. All right. Can you guys see this?
Yep.
So mine is going to be a little more of like some experience, I guess. So I don't know about anybody else, but it was kind of daunting. Like I came from completely a different industry, and it's like, at what point can you start like selling your services, more or less, like for side projects and other things? And my experience has been like literally after Splurdy and even not even all of Nomster, you can get paid to do quite a bit. So that's kind of what this talk is going to be about. So just a precursor, I have a 5-year-old at home, so we were talking about that before the chats. I had some free stock photography here down in our basement, so we're rolling with Lego tonight. So we're gonna go over. I guess first of all, my experience. I was a junior web developer, like paid at as a junior web developer for about 6-7 months. I'm in between jobs at the moment because we're moving. And beyond that, I do have several years of business experience. I ran a painting business. So I'm kind of like, I have a lot of experience with clients in general and like a sales process in a service business. I mean, somebody's house is like one of the most expensive things that they own, probably the most expensive. So they're kind of touchy about it. So I'm going to cover, avoiding some pitfalls and a few guidelines in general. So the biggest thing up front is I did not realize in working with even, a client I'm working with now, like they literally think I'm some kind of wizard. It's unreal. Like you think, oh, I don't know a whole lot HTML, CSS, that's pretty basic stuff. That's like you're trying to speak like you're from another planet for a lot of business people and just people in general. So some of the questions that I've been asked, even just a short time for side projects, I'm pretty like not aggressive person. We're like sitting in a bar somewhere, like talking to somebody, and they're like, "Yeah, but like, what about? Can you do search engine optimization?" And like, what like everybody says it's a big deal, and like, man, you are worrying about the last, the wrong thing here. And then you hear people, they get a lot of quoted prices for like, $7,000 for like a simple splash page for their site, because if somebody in a company like your company, you service larger clients, you're probably not going to, you have a bottom threshold that you won't go below because it's just not your target. So there's a lot of kind of piggybacking on I think John, that was one of your talks, it was hustle and grind. You can do a lot of hustle and grind to get some smaller fish, I guess you would say. This is a basic process to follow. Kind of what I've been doing. It changes a little bit, but similar to what Colin mentioned as well. Sit down, gather some basic information and needs from the client. Like I started working with, I put together I guess you would call it a proposal. I still have to write up a small contract for a church. my parents' church, I met with the pastor. He had mentioned he wanted to go through some things like, okay, well, how serious are you? What do you want to actually do? Because a lot of places, small businesses, organizations are like, we know we need a website. And like, that's great. But what do you want it to do? So kind of like helping them, pointing them in the right direction. And then as far as, putting together some wireframes, I would highly suggest keeping a simple contract. I literally Googled contract for web design or web development, and there's one on there called Killer Contract. I can look it up and post that later. And it's like in plain English with some humor involved in it, but like sound as far as legal goes. It doesn't require, you to be a lawyer in order to figure that stuff out. So then basically we talked about everything. I went back, thought about it, how long it would take, put together some basic wireframes. I'm going to send it back to them. Actually going to, let's see. Doesn't have to be anything that's like super crazy. See if I have a picture of it. If not, I can pull it up later. As far as wireframes go, yeah, I think that one's on my actual iPad. So, but I literally did the whiteboard thing, took a picture of it, and that's going to be my wireframes for it. Have some sort of a timeline involved. One of the projects I'm working on right now, I said I'm going to have a rough draft done by the 1st of June and completion by mid-June. So before that, you walk through, say, what you need to bring to the table is you need to, if there's a deposit, if there's copy involved, who's responsible for pictures, that type of thing. And then once it's all done or close to being done, depending upon if you're working on small commits or large pushes, go live. In my case, I'm using Heroku because it's super easy and that's what we've been trained to do. So I just I think it's like astropainting or herokuapp.com. Like you can look that up. It's live right now, but not anybody's going to find it unless I tell them exactly what it is. So I'm using that as my staging area. And then I purchased through Google domains, an actual what he wanted for a custom domain name. And so then once it's ready to go, I will pay for it for the hobby version, probably for Heroku for that one site, and then switch it over to his custom domain. So that way you don't have the 10-second lag anymore. Invoicing, I've become familiar with FreshBooks from another project I was working on. It doesn't matter. You could write up something on a piece of paper. They have those tickets literally like at Office Depot or whatever, like little server pads. You could just say, you owe me this much, have some sort of receipts. You could type it up, just Google it. It's not that big of a deal. And then I think the biggest part besides getting paid is walk through, like, what did you learn? Like, what would you do differently? Were your estimates way off? Some sort of retrospective. I mean, that's a very agile process anyways, so you should probably do that. And you hope that it turns out really well. At least in my mind, that's what I was kind of going for. A couple of pieces of advice. Actually, I'm going to back up a second here. I guess overall, it's kind of a freaky feeling invoicing clients, like when you feel like you're not that confident in what you're doing anyways. I tend to underprice, like, oh, what am I really worth for hourly rate when I'm just starting out? But I mean, the truth is, most people, if you hear they get bids for, like I said, over $5,000 for simple sites, I wouldn't feel too bad about it at all. And the other thing I try to keep in mind is, at this point in my career, does it really matter if it's perfect? Not really. So if if you mess something up, bugs are normal. That's the way it goes. Even when you're super advanced and you have lots of experience, it's just part of the process. So kind of how you pitch it to the clients. Like if you're fast turnaround of fixing something, I mean, some things require a heavier staging area. It depends. But for a simple splash site, I wouldn't worry about it. You're going to muck it up, and that's fine. So the big thing in business I've learned is under promise and over deliver. Don't do the reverse. That's an awful experience. So you literally take a bunch of stuff from the client. Hopefully you got some basic needs that they wanted. You kind of like, if you're just starting off, like for me, I was like, I'm just going to group this in a week. This looks like it would take me about a week. So that was my estimate. And I put it as a number and I started multiplying a couple of things. And what I didn't do the first time around was have a fudge factor of sorts. So that guy got off pretty cheap because, well, it was one of my friends anyways, but the timeline, same thing. I would just tack on some extra time. And if things go well, you tell them 2 weeks or a month and they're okay with that. Then when you finish it and everything's cool at 2 weeks, they're going to be like, holy cow, you are way ahead of schedule. Like I'm going to tell, all my friends about you, or at least they'll be really excited and you won't have any issues getting paid. That's my experience with painting houses as well. So you're asking questions to the client, you can definitely set yourself up for success. In general, you can, the real conversation happens once you actually get a price anyways. So if you're comfortable talking about a price with people, it goes much easier for you. Like maybe they won't trust you enough to flat out tell you their exact price, but like with the church, I got him to say in talking, he's like, $1,000. It's like, okay, well, that means the custom work's probably off the table. Like I'm not going to build a complete, Ruby on Rails app content management system for you for $1,000. Like I'm not going to do that. But what they are using right now is actually they are using WordPress or a version of it. It's like for WordPress for churches or something. So I'm gonna look into that in my contract, and then we're gonna go the template route. And I told them that straight up. I just said, you don't need a custom build. You don't even need this. Like the church version that you were using was probably from 5 years ago. Now you better off be going mainstream, pick a theme. Like just to be clear, I am going to use a template. I'm going to set it up for you for an initial build. I'm going to help you hook a couple things up. That's what they're getting for $750 is the price. It's going to take me a week or less to do this. And that's being generous. Like I could probably set it up in 2 days, depending upon what else they want. So trying to like add buffer in. That's my third gig here. So another thing I keep reminding myself is I actually saw a couple posts for larger projects, like the whole agile board thing. I'm not saying use Trello for everything. I've also used like Jira before, which is like a massive system for job tickets, but just keep it simple for like organize it, break it into chunks that you can manage. Trello works really well for small projects. It doesn't matter if you have a whiteboard. Just organize it somehow and start busting things apart. Well, all I simply did was look at the components, and then I looked up Nomster and Flixter and the lessons, and like, hey, these both follow about the same kind of process. I'm going to start with a splash page, or build my pipeline first, then my splash page, my index. Then I'm going to probably have to figure out what my main model and controllers are. And I literally just followed those, and I started making tickets on Trello. Like that seemed to work really pretty well last time, so why not stick to that? Beyond that, I've seen this in my previous job, and I worked a couple of group projects in our meetup group that I kind of helped run for like the past 6 months. And everybody gets really excited about a project, myself included, and then all of a sudden it gets time to start working, and you're like, what about this? What about that? Where do I begin? Where do I do this? What if I screw it up? What if I pick the wrong naming? You know, what if let's create a migration and it's not named right, or I want to change the table later. Maybe I have to have a master plan for everything. And after a while, you just like, it's like looking at Facebook, and then like an hour later, you haven't done a damn thing. and it doesn't help you. So it's like, you're better off just to break it into a small chunk. And what Colin said before too, with GitHub, if you mess it up, just revert back. Same thing with video games. Save often, and it does it for you. You can always just quick load back to what you did before and unmuck it up that way. So beyond that, I would say, so I guess to sum it all up, my experience has been communicate well with the client, have a lot of confidence going in, and just be honest open with people, and try and steer what their expectations are. And then you kind of have, until you have a process down and your own data, you might as well just add a fudge factor and just kind of roll with it. I would say I'm not going to be taking on any projects that are, I in my mind, I think are going to take me more than a couple of weeks, because if I am way off, you know, I'm going to put myself in a small box where at least I could dig my way out of the hole in a month. So that'll be for later, I think. But yeah, if anybody have any questions about anything.
So Amanda had a question in chat. She was curious how you dealt with the payment of the domain, or not the domain, the payment of the Heroku, because it's a monthly like recurring cost. So what were your thoughts? Like, how did you deal with that?
Well, how I'm dealing with it right now is I simply said $10 a month for a year. So I just, that's the cost up front. I said, you know, $120 for it to be on Heroku, and I think the hobby version is $7 a month. And I just made it a round number for him. I'm not going to tell him it's $7 a month. I told him I'm going to split it up. I think one guy asked me, and I was like, well, I'm not going to charge you the individual cost, because at that point I wasn't sure if I was going to use DigitalOcean or Heroku. So that's kind of how I handled that. And then at that point, either they can re-up with me, or I can easily move it over to somebody else. That's about as far as I thought about it.
I think the common rule of thumb, because I've had these questions too, is like, you know, how do you deal with recurring payments and stuff like that? For me, with the few freelance clients that I deal with, they're all family at this point. So I can, you know, if they don't pay me, I can go make them pay up right away. But when you're dealing with clients, actual business clients and stuff like that, is you typically want to have them pay for their hosting, their domain, any additional services that need to be handled. That way you don't have to send them invoices constantly when it's something that should just be set up for automatic payment. And if I forget to update my expiration date on my credit card and their site goes down or they lose their domain, that's on me, and that can get you in a lot of trouble. So for a lot of that stuff, from freelancers I've talked to, and the generic rule of thumb is to have your clients be paying for their hosting, and that's typically what I've done as well.
So just to add on to that, when I was doing, and I still am kind of doing a little bit of freelance work on the side, there's a lot of software out there now that's actually specific for freelancers to invoice other people. So I did a bunch of research, and one of the websites I used is waveapps.com. It's just called Wave Online. And it's pretty much entirely free to the freelancer. And you're able to, I'll paste it in the comments, waveapps.com. And it's entirely free to you. And they only charge a processing fee. So basically, you're able to generate monthly invoices, and you can send it off to your clients, and they can actually pay with credit card to you. And I think the processing fee is like 3% or 3.5%, and that's pretty reasonable. That's pretty much the standard processing fee, even if you were to set it up yourself. So I would take a look at that and see what other freelance invoicing software is now on the market. But that's definitely something to set up. And what I did was I would also just mark up my costs on top of that. If you want to get like very technical, if you're making enough money, you might just want to set up like sole proprietorship. And that way you're able to be able to track your expenses and your profits. So if you have, so you're able to write off some costs. Like for instance, you could write off the Firehose project boot camp $5,000 as
I did last year.
Yeah, you can write that off as an expense for your freelancing business because it is education for you to do freelancing, and you can write off costs for like Sublime and other kind of tools.
Yep.
Computers.
Yeah, my business bought the iPad.
Awesome, good stuff. Oh, cool.
So if people are getting their clients to set up the Heroku account in order to process their own payments for hosting, do you handhold them through the process of setting up the Heroku account and giving you administrative privileges to the account that they set up? Because if people are seeking out these services, they're probably not all that technically inclined to begin with.
From what I've used, I haven't done where they sign up for it, but I have had experience transferring one Heroku to another because we started off and like look, for a one group project, I'm just going to put it on my credit card. It's easier. Like we'll figure that out later. And so, but then we created like an entity for our meetup group. It's actually really simple. And like their dashboard's pretty easy. Like, you go in there and you click on a few things. So that would be one way I think you could do it, where the client could go set up, pay for the service, and then you build it all on your own Heroku, and then you could transfer it over to them. At least that's one thought.
The other way you could do it too is just set up like, if you're remote or if you're working with them, face to face. A lot of my interactions with my consulting clients is all pretty much remote for the most part. So if we have to set up any billing or anything like that, what I typically do is I'll just shoot them a link for like a TeamViewer session or some other remote desktop service and say, hey, let's go through this building real quick. I'll help you walk through it. I just need you to put in all your information so that next year when it rolls around, it automatically deducts off of your credit card. That way you have full control over this and we don't have to worry about it on my end. And you just kind of walk them through those steps, and it makes life really nice, really easy, and really simple.
Cool. Good stuff, guys.
So here's the simple wireframe that I did too. It's like just whiteboarded it. So I went from basic notes to I just started scribbling pretty much, and had my wife take a look at it because we used to go to this church. So she's one of the people, like actually a pretty good case study for somebody who would be using it. But I'm going to show this to the client or the pastor and then see what he thinks about it. So it doesn't have to be fancy as far as, I'll probably do another lightning talk on some different like mock-up wireframe tools, but I'm all about the whiteboard and scribbling on stuff, as you can tell.
Yeah, if you have Apple products, I was telling David this the other day. If you have Apple products, check out the beta version of Adobe XD, which is specifically designed for basically designers, web frame stuff, and you can set up wireboard or artboards where you can actually do wireframes just like this, and then you can just save it as files. I do all my stuff in Photoshop, and then you can, save it as a PNG or a JPEG and email it off to the client and say, hey, this is what it's going to look like. As you scroll through it, this is what the changes are going to look like. This is what each page is going to look like. So if you want, again, if you're remote, it makes life easier. I can't send somebody a whiteboard in the mail. I don't want to. I could. I don't want to.
Stuff. Well, cool. Well, thanks so much, Dave, for presenting. It's super appreciated. I think people have been interested in the whole freelancing thing, and there's so many different aspects of it. I feel like there's the finding the customer, the managing expectations, the building a product, all the way back down to like figuring out how it went. So thanks for giving us the rundown. And I have to say, I love the Legos. The Legos were like just an amazing touch on the presentation. And I'm going to be honest, I'm thinking about what are situations where I can steal that idea and use it in my life to look creative. So thank you for that too.
If anybody else is interested in more of the freelance side of stuff, I've been listening to the Freelancer Show lately. I just got into it in the last couple of weeks. It's by the same guy who does Ruby Rogues from DevChat TV.
Cool.
Super helpful, and there's tons of really good information about legal stuff, about contracts, about acquiring clients, how to find them, how to charge people. I mean, it's got so much information. It's really worth checking out. I'll shoot a link into the chat too, just as a side note.
I think you can talk to that guy too. I think he has 15 minutes. 15 minutes with Charles Max Wood, I think it is.
Yeah, you can do his office hours.
Yeah, anybody can sign up for it, and he'll like answer any questions you got.
Yeah, he's
for like
a
15.
nice guy too. I've talked to him a little bit on Twitter. Add him on Twitter, there's a pretty good chance that he'll possibly reach out to you. I added him on Twitter, and like 2 days later, he sent me a bunch of DMs, asking me questions about his shows and like what level I'm at, what I'm interested in, and he's super approachable. So if you're looking to throw ideas off somebody, it's not a bad person to do it.
Cool. Good stuff. Well, thanks everybody for all the information and the tips and all of that. I think this has been an awesome Lightning Talks, and glad to get another round of them going. For everybody else who didn't give a talk and the people who did, we try to do them every month or so, but the last couple we've had trouble getting it filled up. So basically, I encourage everybody to sign up for Lightning Talks. Think about as you're coding over the next month or so, think about what's one interesting nuance of programming stuff that you encountered that you think you could give back to the community. And I think everybody appreciates it. I think everybody loved the talks tonight, and that could be you next month. So take some time, think about what you want to present, and if you come up with some ideas, talk to Colin and Dave in the Slack channel, as well as if you don't have any ideas, you feel like I don't even know if I could give any talks, the Lightning Talk app that Colin worked on has a bunch of ideas about sort of and that's an awesome article, why it's helpful to give the Lightning Talk, as well as there's a Lightning Talk app with some ideas in it. So take a look at that, see if you want to give a talk on any of those ideas, and we'll do that. So I guess thanks everybody for coming. This has been super fun. Thanks everybody who gave a presentation. They were super interested. And yeah, we'll see you at the next Lightning Talks. Thumbs up.
Trying to get the YouTube link for everybody.
Oh, cool. I can give you a second.
Yeah, just 1 second. We don't have a spiffy name yet. We haven't been on YouTube long enough to get a branded channel.
Someday.
I'll throw those all into, if you're not in the Slack channel for the Lightning Talks, I'll throw all these links in there again. David, did you have any of these pinned in there at all? I don't remember. Terrible.
I don't think so.
Okay, maybe we'll just pin all these into the info box.
Yeah, we're
jump into it.
Perfect. Good stuff, guys.
Awesome.
Well, cool. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll talk to you soon. See you guys later.